Hi guys, Maker's Mark is one of the best known bourbons in the world, and with a history only spanning back around 65 years, it's got one of the coolest stories. Today on Let's Talk Drinks, we're going to learn everything about Maker's Mark. Okay guys, so Maker's Mark was created by Bill Samuels Sr. and his wife Margie in around 1954 in Kentucky, USA. Bill was a fourth generation distiller, and when he retired from the Navy after being a lieutenant, he decided to go back and take it easy on a farm. After a while, his wife Margie got pretty sick of him and she decided that he should go out and get a real job. Although his family had been making whiskey for many generations, he wasn't really a great fan of the whiskies that they made. So he decided that he wanted to make a really smooth sipping style of bourbon. This was a bit of a gamble because bourbon wasn't really that popular at the time and most people were drinking Scotch whiskey and also vodka. Bourbon distilleries were closing down left, right and centre. He went out and bought a distillery for $35,000 so he could make whiskey as a hobby. Who would have known that that small distillery is now the epicenter of one of the world's best known bourbons. It attracts over 1 million visitors every year, all just lining up to go and try the whiskey where it's made. Instead of using the traditional grains that are used in bourbon, like corn, malted barley and rye, Bill and Margie created a new mash bill, or mix of grains, to make their whiskey. They couldn't afford to wait years for the whiskey to mature to actually see whether those grains worked well, so Margie came up with a really great idea. They decided to make bread with the different types of grains to see how they would taste and what sort of flavour characteristics would come out. They decided to use red winter wheat instead of rye, because they felt that rye was a bit too spicy and a little bit bitter. They used a roller mill to crush the grains instead of a hammer mill, because they believed that the hammer mill would bruise and burn the grain, and that would affect the flavour. The Samuels were really lucky because the bourbon community are really supportive of each other. Friends like Hap Motlow from Jack Daniels, Ed Shapiro from Heaven Hill, and even Pappy Van Winkle himself gave them a bit of a hand. Once they distilled their whiskey, they had to wait 5 years for it to mature. So Margie started working on their brand and their bottle. Because Bill Sr. had sold the family name, they had to come up with something new. Margie was a collector of English pewter, and she found that all her really great pieces had their Maker's Mark on them. So they decided to come up with a name. The Maker's Mark always represented quality. They put a star on the label to represent the old family Star Hill Farm, the S to represent the Samuels name, and the number 4 in Roman numerals to represent the 4 generations of distilling in the Samuels family. They also spelt whiskey without the E, in honour of their heritage dating back to Scotland. Maker's Mark was the first bourbon not to be named after a person. Inspired by cognac bottles, every bottle is single-handedly dipped in wax, and the labels were printed on an old printing machine that's still used nowadays. It became really popular in Kentucky, and believe it or not, it was only sold mainly in Kentucky for the first 25 years. All this talking's made me thirsty, so let's give it a try. Unfortunately in Australia, Maker's Mark is 40% ABV instead of 45%, which we normally see everywhere else around the world. And it's aged between 5 to 7 years in brand new American oak barrels. So on the nose, I get fruit cake, a little bit of almond, vanilla, and a touch of honey and oat. We'll give it a taste. It is really smooth and great to sip. I get caramel, buttered corn, vanilla, a little bit of maple syrup, and a hint of sort of spice, kind of like a nutmeggy sort of spice. The finish is like a really nice, warming butterscotch sort of finish. I love it. As far as recommendations, I love it in an old-fashioned. It goes awesomely in a mint julep, just some fresh mint, sugar syrup, a couple shots of the Maker's Mark. It goes really well with soda water, in a highball, ginger ale, and fresh lime. There are so many ways that you can use Maker's Mark. Whiskey sour, Kentucky buck, and even a bourbon Manhattan. It's not expensive, so definitely go out, buy a bottle, give it a try. And once again guys, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and we'll see you all again soon on Let's Talk Drinks.